At my brother's graduation, my own father, a kingmaker on Wall Street, looked right through me as if I was nothing but a shadow. To his colleagues he declared, "Ben is our blue chip, the pride of the Carsons." As for me, after 12 years in the Air Force, I was just a cautionary tale. My father had no idea that the investment he'd written off was about to expose every rotten truth he'd buried beneath his empire. He didn't walk, he glided, like a shark through a school of smaller fish. I forced my face into a mask, blank and still, the way years of officer training had taught me. I fixed my gaze on the distant spire of the university chapel, focusing on it like a sniper steadies his breath before a shot. He was flanked by a senator and a trio of investors, all tipsy and flushed from sun and champagne. But it grew louder and louder until conversation stilled and every head turned to the sky. 3 soldiers in full tactical gear leaped out, holding their rifles in low ready position, not threatening anyone, just making it clear this was not a game. "Major Carson," he said, voice ringing out. Each step toward the chopper felt lighter, more certain. I was leaving their world behind for mine. Memories came in waves. I remembered Christmas Eve years ago in our coldly beautiful home in Bethesda. Ben, 17 then, had ripped open a box to find the keys to a brand new blue BM. My father beamed with pride, calling it an investment in Ben's future. The date was clear as day, March 15th, 2 years ago. Park checked the deployment logs. "That week, you were flying classified missions over Afghanistan. You were off the grid. Your father must have known." I felt cold to the bone. The betrayal was so sharp, so ruthless, it took my breath away. I straightened my back, my mission finally clear. "Find me the best civilian lawyer in this city," I told Park. "One who will fight to the bone." When my turn came, I was handed an envelope. Inside, a check for $500. Check my emails, anything about authorizations, power of attorney, anything with my father's name. "Graham, here's the power of attorney Noah signed before his last deployment. He trusts you. Look it over for him." The attachment was a power of attorney form. My signature was there, perfect, too perfect. It had been lifted from my military records. My family had taken my name and used it to build their fortune. I was going to take back every piece of my life they'd stolen. They had stolen my trust, weaponized it, and now they were using my name to launder their secrets. My hands trembled, just once, then steadied. I looked at Park. "Find the source of that document. Find out who uploaded it and from where." Within minutes, an email popped up, flagged in red. The subject was bland, helping Noah, but the sender was my mother. "For something nice before you leave for officer training," my mother had said, her smile brittle and false. Maybe something more presentable. Their love had always been transactional. Ben was the investment, I was the expense. The document was uploaded from our old house in Bethesda, my childhood home. Every last excuse, every hope for a misunderstanding, vanished. This wasn't a mistake, it was a hit job, deliberate and cold. The rotors screamed as we lifted off, rising over the city. I remembered the day I told my father I wanted to go into combat aviation, not law or business like he wanted. We were in his office, lined with books he'd never read. He didn't shout, he never did. Instead, he leaned back in his chair and stared at me like he was sizing up a bad stock. "Noah," he said quietly, "I had hoped the Air Force would fix these rebellious urges. Carsons don't need to prove themselves with dirt under their fingernails. There's no return on investment in risking your life." He didn't care about my purpose or my calling, only the family brand. I wasn't his son. I was an underperforming asset. The Capitol and White House shrank beneath us. My mind churned, replaying my father's smirk, my brother's pride, the investors' laughter. We landed with a shudder. Colonel Park led me into the secure facility at the base. The buzz of servers and the smell of old coffee filled the air. I was back in my world, a world of facts and threats, not of judgments and disappointment. Park and I moved quickly, scanning through files and data. Suddenly, he stopped, his eyes widened. "Major, you need to see this." Now, my name was on a contract, and I was in a world of trouble again, thanks to them. "We need you, now." My father's mouth fell open. My mother clutched at her pearls, her face drained of color. "Major Noah Carson, United States Air Force, Special Operations Command. Your immediate presence is required." He handed a heavy envelope to the dean, then turned to me, his voice dropping low. Noah, it's urgent. There's a contract for military equipment with your name on it. It never arrived. There's trouble. I nodded once, the shock already cooling into that hard, icy resolve I'd relied on for years. My pulse steadied. They moved fast, forming a tight perimeter. Then a fourth man emerged. Colonel Alex Park strode across the grass as if he owned it, ignoring the chaos. He came straight toward me. A gray Black Hawk helicopter thundered down from the clouds, slicing the air like a knife. The orchestra playing under the white tent screeched to a stop. Guests scattered as the downdraft whipped hats and graduation caps into the air. Napkins tumbled and someone screamed, clutching her designer hat to her head. With military precision, the helicopter set down on the main lawn. My father clapped my brother Ben on the shoulder. Ben glowed in his cap and gown, the golden child. This is Ben, my father announced, loud enough for everyone to hear, his voice booming with pride. Graduating with honors, ready to take on global finance, the future of the family. Then his eyes found me. Instantly, the warmth vanished and contempt slid into place. He gave a small, dismissive laugh and lifted his glass for the crowd. Every family has its portfolio, right? Ben is our blue chip stock. As for Noah, 12 years in the Air Force and not a single return on investment, some bets just don't pay off. My name is Noah Carson. I'm 30 years old. For 12 of those years, I have served as an officer in the United States Air Force, but on that day, I was just a ghost at my own brother's celebration. It was a perfect May afternoon in Washington, D.C. Sunlight painted the lawns of Georgetown University in that golden way you only see on postcards. Laughter rang out like the bubbles in the Veuve Clicquot being poured everywhere. The whole city felt like it was celebrating. But I stood alone beneath a sprawling oak tree, clutching a glass of sparkling water as if it were an anchor. I wore a simple pair of gray slacks and a white linen shirt, which looked cheap and out of place in a crowd dressed in designer labels and tailored suits. My mother, Catherine, swept past, her gaze pausing on me just long enough for her lips to tighten. She didn't stop, but her words floated back over her shoulder, sharp and icy. Noah, honestly, I sent you money. Couldn't you have bought something decent to wear? You make me feel like I'm hiding a family secret. I just stared at my hands, my knuckles going white around the glass. I had gotten used to being the blemish in the otherwise perfect Carson family portrait. Breathing slowly, in and out like they taught us in training, it was a survival tool on deployment. Funny how little it helped at home. That's when my father, Graham Carson, made his entrance. People laughed. It was awkward, forced, but it was laughter all the same. The punch landed in my stomach like a fist. That's when the world truly shifted. It started as a distant vibration, a low hum that was easy to miss at first. The side door slid open. My family and every guest stared in shock as Colonel Park stopped before me and saluted. Colonel Park? My father sputtered, unable to hide his confusion. Colonel Park ignored him, speaking over the hum of the helicopter. I turned my back on my family, ignoring my father's pale face and my mother's horrified silence. Inside the helicopter, as we raced toward Joint Base Anacostia, I couldn't stop thinking about all the old wounds my family had given me. The memories wouldn't stop. That same feeling burned in me now as the helicopter sped through the DC sky. He turned his monitor so I could see. There it was, in black and white, a $2 million line of credit, opened in my name with a Virginia bank. Keep digging, I told Park, my voice so calm it surprised me. The message was short. He nodded and began tracing. The map that popped up on his screen made my blood run cold. I felt the beginnings of rage, pure and dangerous, building inside. I wasn't helpless. I wasn't their pawn anymore. As he set to work, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of purpose, fueled by betrayal and a need for justice that was bigger than myself. The lair Colonel Park found was nothing like the slick, arrogant men who surrounded my father at every turn. Her office sat above a sandwich shop on Connecticut Avenue, the entrance marked by a brass plate with just her last name, Medina. She wore a faded Marines t-shirt under her blazer and didn't bother to stand when she gestured to the cracked leather chair across from her desk. I gave her the whole story, the forged credit line, the power of attorney, the proof that my family had stolen my name to make themselves rich. I told her about my deployments, my childhood, my father's contempt, and my mother's careful betrayal. I kept the emotion out of my voice. Carmen didn't ask for it, and I didn't want to give them that satisfaction. Wire fraud, identity theft. If you want to take them down, we can do it. Major, she said, her voice dry but not unkind. I read the files Colonel Park sent over. He'll buy up every lawyer in the city. He'll leak stories about you. He'll try to paint you as unstable, as an angry soldier with a vendetta. You need to be ready for them to drag you through the mud. Not happiness, not relief, but a hard, cold hope, the kind you feel before going into battle. Carmen walked me down to the coffee shop beneath her office. She ordered 2 black coffees and sat across from me, her elbows on the scarred tabletop. They never understood your absences, did they? They treated your service like a long vacation. It didn't come as a legal threat or a subpoena. It came wrapped in silk, disguised as love. The restaurant she suggested was the Capitol Grill, my father's usual haunt for private deals and favors. It was enemy territory. Part of me wanted to say no. But a smaller, dumber part, the piece that remembered the bedtime stories she used to read to me, the lullabies, the rare moments of warmth, still wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, she was telling the truth. Not a word about the fraud. Not a word about the case. It was all meant to soften me up. I was going over documents with Carmen on speakerphone when my cell buzzed. The screen flashed a name I hadn't seen in weeks. Mom, he's heartbroken, truly. But if you go through with this, you'll destroy Ben. His career will be ruined before it starts. Is that really what you want? To take everything from your brother? The pivot. In her version, I was the traitor, the ungrateful child, not the victim. Not the one whose name was used and discarded. I looked her in the eyes, and for the first time, I felt nothing but freedom. I paid it in blood and time and years I can't get back. I owe him nothing but the truth. I felt something break in me, not pain, not anger, but a deep, bottomless pity for this woman who clung so desperately to an illusion. I turned and walked out, leaving her behind in that cold, elegant room. I tapped it open, and there it was, a front-page article in the DC Journal. The kind of story every power player in the city reads with their morning coffee. The headline was vague but devastating, a rift in a legendary finance family. It didn't use names, but it didn't have to. It described a decorated but troubled Air Force officer making wild accusations against her own family. She had thrown the first punch in the only way she knew how, but I was ready for war. He was using the press to paint me as an unstable, dangerous veteran, to turn the world against me before I could speak. The credit belongs to the one in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood. I wasn't going to let them write my story. I wasn't going to let their lies define me. I was in the arena. I was not leaving quietly. I'm asking you to be a son. Your father gave you everything. You owe him this. You left us to chase some fantasy of heroism. The least you can do is think of your family now. I want the world to see what Graham Carson did to me. This isn't a threat. It's a promise. My mother was already seated, glass of Chardonnay in hand. She didn't stand or hug me. She barely smiled. I opened it to find him shaking, a printout of the article in his hand. By stealing my life, my name, my future? By building your success on my blood? The anger faded, replaced by a crushing sense of isolation. I'd survived terror and bullets on foreign soil. But nothing had prepared me for this, the cold, calculated cruelty of my own family. I stared into the darkness, searching for something to hold on to. Anything. What did you do, Noah?
He shouted, his voice cracking. Dad says you're sick.
That he was just trying to protect you. How could you bring this on us? Instead, she offered an air kiss that hovered somewhere near my cheek. A convenient excuse for them to do what they wanted, safe in the knowledge that you wouldn't be around to stop them. He turned and left without another word. I made it through selection at Lackland. I survived missions no one will ever know about. I can survive this. Worried about me or about Dad's investment portfolio? My mother's voice was sweet, but it was the same syrup she poured on all my father's clients' wives. Are you asking me to protect a criminal? To stay silent so you all keep your lives intact? Noah, honey, I heard you're back in DC. Why haven't you called? Your father and I have been worried. Good, then let's make him wish he'd never underestimated you. She looked at me, and for the first time in years I felt seen not as a disappointment or a liability, but as someone who had been fighting a war on two fronts. Before we go further, tell me, are you ready to drop the bomb on your own family? As soon as I stepped inside, I smelled old paper and strong coffee. There were no glass walls or designer furniture, just books stacked in wild, teetering towers and framed clippings from her victories over companies I'd only ever seen on the news. Carmen Medina looked up as I entered. She was compact with sharp features and eyes that seemed to measure everything in a single glance. Don't do this, Noah. We're a family. Your father has always wanted what's best for you. He was trying to protect you, that's all. Please meet me for lunch. Just the two of us. My treat. Let's talk this through. Look here, she said, her voice all business now. The signature is a paste job. Good but not expert. The software used to make the edit is banned by the Department of Defense. Whoever did this did it on a private system, and they weren't careful about covering their tracks. We have enough to go nuclear. I nodded, sitting straighter than I had all day. When I finished, she sat back, tapping a chipped mug on her desk. She turned her attention to the digital copy of the power of attorney. She flashed me a predator's smile. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt hope. Listen to me, she said quietly. Your father will fight dirty. I met her gaze, feeling the exhaustion fade just a little. She gave a single sharp nod. But as we got to work, my father made his first move. I was back in my short-term rental, the corporate apartment in Alexandria, its air thick with the smell of new paint and uncertainty. I lifted a finger to Carmen, signaling her to hold, then answered. A bitter taste filled my mouth. The silence that followed was sharp, almost painful. She regrouped fast, her tone dropping into something wounded and fragile. Everything about the invitation screamed trap. I agreed to meet her. The place hadn't changed. Dark wood everywhere, the buzz of powerful men talking money, the clink of heavy silverware, and the subtle perfume of steak and wine. For 30 minutes she talked about Ben's bright future, the upcoming charity gala, and the rumors floating around the country club. When the waiter cleared our untouched plates, she reached across the table, her manicured hand settling on mine. Her touch was icy. Noah, she said, her voice trembling, eyes glistening, your father made a terrible mistake. I pulled my hand away, my own resolve hardening. She started to cry then, perfectly controlled tears that never once smudged her makeup. There it was. I stood, took out enough cash to pay for both our meals, and set it on the table. I've already paid my debt, I said softly. Her eyes went wide, shocked by the finality in my voice. The next morning, my phone vibrated with a message from Colonel Park. No words, just a link. My father had struck back. As if on cue, my brother Ben banged on my apartment door. I stared at my brother, his face so certain of his own innocence. In that moment, something inside me snapped. Protect me! He gaped, speechless. For the first time, he seemed to see me as something more than just the awkward, broken sibling he barely acknowledged. When the door closed, I slid to the floor, head in my hands. A line from a book an old Air Force sergeant once gave me drifted back. It is not the critic who counts, not the one who points out where the strong stumble. Something clicked into place. I picked up my phone and called Carmen. When she answered, my voice was steel, no negotiations. We take this to court. I want every secret exposed. The real war had just begun. The vow I made to Carmen was not just an outburst. It was the beginning of an operation, the kind I'd spent my entire adult life preparing for. The moment I hung up, I felt the old, steady calm settle over me, the same cold focus I learned to carry through missions that could end with a single mistake. My entire career, every mission, every training, every commendation laid out in black and white. We cross-referenced every date, every location, every financial transaction Carmen had uncovered. To open the account, he used a scanned Georgia driver's license in your name. Have you ever been to Georgia? Never had a driver's license there, I replied. March 15th, the day the fraudulent credit line was opened in Virginia. He didn't just forge your name, Noah. He created a whole fake identity he could control. My record showed I was flying over Afghanistan, running a covert operation. I need to confirm Lieutenant Carson's legal power of attorney. Then my father's voice, smooth as ever. This is Graham Carson. I'm his power of attorney. You can speak to me. September 10th, the day another brokerage account was opened in my name. The final puzzle piece came from Colonel Park. He was poring over old communications and suddenly looked up. Every head turned. My father saw the ribbons, the rank, the steel in my posture, and I saw something flicker in his eyes. My client, Major Noah Carson, stands before you not for a family dispute, but to report a coordinated federal crime. Her service and her name have been weaponized against her. Not fear, not yet, but confusion, as if I was rewriting the script he had prepared for everyone in that room. On March 15th, when this credit line was opened, Major Carson was on classified operations overseas. Pin after pin appeared on a map behind her, each one showing I was hundreds or thousands of miles away from every fraudulent action my father took. Remember that time, years ago, your life insurance policy had a beneficiary issue while you were overseas? I was listed as your emergency contact. You used my name, the one I fought to defend for your own greed. That isn't protection, that's theft. My logs proved I was halfway around the world, training with NATO in the French Alps. Let's examine the nature of this so-called protection, she said, looking my father dead in the eyes. All calls involving sensitive personnel data get recorded by protocol, Park said, a small smile growing on his face. The illusion shattered, the family's perfect story destroyed by a single undeniable truth. My father collapsed into his chair, his confidence gone, his arrogance stripped bare. He stood, his face the picture of wounded dignity. My mother and Ben sat motionless, shock painted on their faces. I paused, letting him hear the finality in my voice. Today I'm cutting my losses. Carmen and I packed our briefcases. There was no cheer, no sense of celebration. Just the deep, exhausting relief of having survived a war that was never of my own choosing. My daughter chose a path I never understood. Noah, please, we can fix this. I'll give it all back. Every cent, please. I only wanted to protect her future, just emptiness. He recoiled, just slightly, like he'd been hit. If I made mistakes, they were mistakes of love. Carmen's voice never wavered. She showed the email from my mother, the power of attorney attachment, the digital signature that matched one pulled from my military files. I looked straight at him, the whole room hanging on my words. Let me check something. Hours later, a secure audio file arrived from the legal office. We had his voice, his words, his intent, all recorded and logged. She displayed the paperwork for yet another secret account, this one naming my brother Ben as sole beneficiary if anything ever happened to me during deployment. My mother's face went white, and my brother's mouth fell open. For the first time, he saw the ugly truth. He was not the golden child. He was the exit strategy, the insurance policy, just another pawn. Every lie my father had built was crushed beneath the weight of military fact. This wasn't a family drama anymore. It was an assignment. The target, my father's fortress of lies. The ammunition, proof he could never outrun. I started with the one thing my father would never expect. She built a wall of proof, piece by piece, until there were no cracks left to hide in. My father's confidence, his arrogance, was about to be smashed under the weight of every lie he ever told. I flew across the country to California, to the Naval Air Base at San Diego, the place where I'd built my reputation and earned my scars. No civilian clothes, no attempt to blend in. I wanted them to see exactly who they were up against. The federal boardroom was a cold, intimidating space, all dark wood and harsh light. 3 stone-faced adjudicators sat at the head of the table. My father arrived with his army of lawyers, looking as calm as ever, his suit crisp, his hair perfect. The moment my boots hit the tarmac, I felt the tension leave my shoulders. This was home, the place where I knew who I was. I walked straight to records, Colonel Park by my side, and handed my ID to a chief with 20 years of service in his face. I need my full deployment logs and evaluations for the past decade, I said. He didn't ask questions. He just moved, pulling box after box of files, the kind that most people never look at twice. We spread everything out in a tiny, windowless conference room, under harsh fluorescent lights. While I gathered my evidence, Carmen was back in D.C., hunting for more. She called late one night, her voice sharp with excitement. Noah, I found another shell corporation. Meridian Venture LLC, Delaware registered, of course. It's been receiving small, steady payments from a Mork Holdings subsidiary, all managed by Graham Carson. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was grave. Only the airport. Carmen continued. The file was uploaded from the IP address registered to your father's K Street office. I felt a fresh surge of anger at just how far my father had gone to manipulate my life. I nodded, remembering the bureaucratic mess. We played it in a silent room. I heard the voice of a younger Colonel Park. Click. That was the sound of the trap closing. Carmen assembled everything: deployment records, bank documents, emails, the shell company registrations, the audio clip. The day of the hearing, I dressed in my Air Force service blues, but the moment I walked in, the room went silent. Carmen stood, her presence commanding. Good morning, panel. She laid out the evidence with surgical precision. First, the deployment logs. Then came the shell companies, the forged licenses, the metadata that traced everything straight back to my father's office and our family home. My father's lead lawyer tried to object, claiming speculation, but Carmen was relentless. That was when my father tried his performance. It was my turn. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. You stole my present to build your own future. For a split second, I saw the mask slip. Carmen wasn't finished. One final document, she said, her tone low and lethal. Then turned to my father, his voice a broken whisper. You used me. It wasn't my words or Carmen S. that finished my father. It was Ben's heartbreak. The hearing ended in a hush. My father's lawyers whispered frantically. As we walked into the marble hallway, my father staggered after me, his face gray and hollow. I looked at him, truly looked at him, and felt nothing. No hatred, no pride, not even anger. You can't give back the years you took, Dad. You can't buy back trust. You can't undo the damage. I walked past him, my footsteps echoing on the cold floor, and I never looked back. The fallout was swift, cold, and public. The Department of Justice issued a formal statement, and I saw my father's name everywhere on TV tickers, in the Wall Street Journal, in breaking news banners. Years of holding my breath, of waiting for the other shoe to drop, finally released all at once. It wasn't just relief. It was like standing in the ruins after a hurricane, knowing the storm is over, but everything familiar is gone. Graham Carson indicted for wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to defraud the United States. I braced myself, but when I answered, all I heard was broken, desperate sobbing. I resigned, Noah, he choked out. I had spent years fighting to clear my name, thinking it would bring me closure. The question is whether you're willing to pay it, and whether you can live with what it buys you. For the first time, I was not defined by my family name. I was simply Noah, just myself. It felt strange, like trying on a new uniform that hadn't yet molded to my skin. Instead, I was left with a kind of loneliness. I'd never known a silence so complete it almost rang in my ears. I had destroyed the Carson legacy, but there was nothing left to replace it. And laid it on the table next to a battered old photo of our unit in the desert. The real value of a name, I realized, wasn't in the fortune attached to it. It was in the truth you built for yourself, day by day, scar by scar. What does home mean when everything that once defined you has burned to the ground? I looked at those faces, each one smiling back, and realized what I had gained. But for the first time, I believed they might. Not a family legacy, but a family of my own, choosing people who knew my real story and had stayed anyway. His words were short, but his eyes told the story. The military had seen my fight, and they understood what it meant to hold your ground when everyone else expects you to fold. The Hall of Valor at the Pentagon was quiet and solemn, the names of the lost carved into cool stone. This time I wore my Air Force fatigues. I was there not as a witness or a victim, but as an officer being honored for a mission so classified even the citation barely mentioned details. My teammates gathered with me, standing silent but proud. Not family, not tradition, not even the comfort of hate. I was free, yes. But freedom had a bitter taste. I found my friends at a dingy bar near the base, the kind with battered wood and faded flags and laughter that rolled from old wounds. We squeezed into a booth and ordered beers. No one mentioned the trial. No one spoke my father's name. They just told stories, raised glasses, and filled the night with the kind of warmth I'd always wanted from family. When the tears faded, I spoke quietly but firmly. You have to build your own life now, Ben. That's the only way forward. You can't live on a foundation made from lies. You have to start over. Everyone at the firm looks at me like I'm contaminated, like I'm a criminal. I swear I didn't know. I didn't know any of it. His empire froze overnight. Federal agents locked his offices. His closest partners abandoned him in silence, their friendship dissolving as quickly as the value of his stocks. He'd never asked for any of this, but ignorance isn't innocence. That was the final cruelty my father inflicted, making Ben the beneficiary of a crime he never wanted. The world that had once praised him now devoured him with the same greed he had used to build it. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, what washed over me was exhaustion so deep it seemed to settle in my bones. He just cried softly, and when the call ended, I stared at the ceiling for a long time, feeling the weight of every decision, every broken bond. A few days later, my phone rang. I saw Ben's name and felt a stab of dread. There was no anger left in me for Ben. I believed him. I listened for a long time, letting his pain pour through the line. He didn't reply. That night, in my silent apartment, I finally faced the cost of winning. I remembered something an old master sergeant told me after a disastrous deployment. Truth always comes with a price. As the days passed, news cycles chewed through my father's downfall and moved on. 6 months later, I stood in a place far from any courtroom or city office. The Secretary of the Air Force pinned the medal to my chest. Afterward, there was a small reception, but I skipped it. I needed something real. Later, sitting at the edge of the group, I opened the small box with my medal. I thought of Carmen, of Colonel Park, of the countless friends who'd never asked for anything but honesty and loyalty in return. In that moment, I knew I had not just survived. I had become someone new. But, as I stared into the dark at the bottom of my glass, I wondered, how do you start again, when the past you escaped still lives in every memory? The answers didn't come that night. Time became a strange, drifting thing after the trial. Each day I woke up in that quiet Alexandria apartment, feeling lighter but somehow untethered, as if part of me was still waiting for another fight. I kept busy debriefings, therapy appointments, meetings with the military's legal team, but there was an emptiness to it all, a hollow space where my family used to be. I started walking in the evenings, trying to find a rhythm. Sometimes I wandered the silent neighborhoods for hours, listening to the hum of distant traffic, the echoes of laughter spilling out of restaurants. The world dissected my father's downfall until there was nothing left, and then they moved on to fresher scandals. His old friends stopped returning calls. Even Ben, after that first shattering phone call, fell silent. I waited for my father's approval, desperate for it. I wrote about the case, about deployments, about the friends I'd lost. There was no subject line, just a few short sentences. I wrote about the costs of truth and how silence can rot a family from the inside out. I really am. But for the version of myself that had spent years believing love was a currency to be earned, I know I didn't see any of it. There didn't need to be. I stood before the wall etched with names, some I'd known, some I'd never meet. I placed my hand on the cool stone and whispered a promise. I could feel the next chapter pulling at me, a future still unwritten, full of risks and promise, and the one thing my father could never steal, my own name. Not just to the friends I'd lost, but to myself. That I would never again let someone else define my worth. That I would use my own pain to stand up for others, to refuse to be silent even when it was safer, easier. Some wounds needed time, and maybe they'd never fully close. For the first time, I felt the faint, uncertain spark of belonging. Maybe not home, not yet, but something close enough. I want to start over, but I don't know how. Maybe one day we can talk. I hope you're okay. I didn't care if anyone ever read it. The act of putting the words down made me feel real again. Like I was more than just a casualty of my father's ambition. When he finally looked up, all he said was, "You can do better. The world only rewards the best." Even now, after everything, those words still stung. But I finally understood something I never had before. The world doesn't reward the best, it rewards the brave. The honest, the ones willing to fight for themselves even when no one else will. I tried not to blame him. We had both lost the only foundation we'd ever known. Once I passed a family gathered around a table, their joy so effortless I almost turned away. "Proud of you," he'd say. "You did the right thing, even when it hurt." From him, those words meant more than any medal. For years, I'd believed that kind of connection was something you fought for. Something you could force into existence by being useful, by being good enough. I hope you do, Ben. I hope I do too. Now, seeing it as an outsider, I realized how wrong I'd been. Carmen checked in often, always with that brisk, no-nonsense tone. I found myself drawn to people who had their own scars, their own hard-won truths, people like Carmen and the men and women from my unit. We met for drinks, for coffee, for long, rambling talks about everything and nothing. Each of them became a piece of the new life I was building, not out of the ashes of the old, but alongside it. She brought coffee and paperwork and an occasional story from her Marine days, her presence grounding me when the quiet became too sharp. "You know, Noah," she said once, "freedom always feels like a punch in the gut at first. But it's better than living under someone else's thumb." I would stand in my kitchen at dawn, staring out at the city waking up, and wonder if anyone else had ever felt this particular kind of loss of victory that left you standing alone in the wreckage. The hardest part wasn't hating my father or forgiving my mother. It was realizing that my story was truly my own now. There was no one left to define it but me. Colonel Park called less frequently, but when he did, his voice was warm. Meanwhile, the news churned on, relentless and indifferent. Some days the loneliness hit harder than others. A memory surfaced, one I hadn't thought of in years. Sitting on my childhood bed, maybe 12 years old, clutching a report card I'd worked so hard for. I started writing, at first just to fill the hours. One night, unable to sleep, I opened my laptop and found an email from Ben. "I'm sorry." I read it twice, then closed my eyes and let the tears fall, not for Ben, not for my parents. "The next day," I replied. "We both have to learn what it means to build a life from scratch." There was no reply. The months passed. The sting of betrayal dulled into a deep ache, the kind that faded only with new memories. One evening I found myself back at the Hall of Valor, wandering its hushed halls. That night, in a crowded bar full of veterans, I raised a glass and laughed, really laughed, for the first time in years. The sound was raw, unfiltered, free. But the journey wasn't over. As the seasons changed, so did I. Each morning, I found it a little easier to breathe. The city was still the same, with its suits and deals and silent power struggles, but I felt less like a stranger every day. I started volunteering with a veterans support group, mostly just listening at first, then slowly sharing my own story. I was surprised by how many people recognized the outlines of their own battles in mine, the families who never understood, the betrayals that cut deepest because they came from the people we loved most. Carmen encouraged me to keep talking, to write more. She came to meetings sometimes, not as my lawyer but as a friend. In those rooms, she was just another former Marine, trading scars and stories. He wore a battered army cap, and his hands shook just slightly. "It's never too late," I told him. "Your story matters. You deserve to be heard." "You said something about silence," he said, his voice rough with emotion. I opened it slowly, heart pounding, half afraid of what I'd find. How sometimes it keeps you alive, but sometimes it kills your spirit. That hit me, son. I never said a word about what happened to me after the war. Not to anyone, not even my kids. Maybe I should try? She had her own wounds, old betrayals that had driven her from her family long before she ever wore a uniform. Sometimes I dreamed of my father's voice, smooth and commanding, telling me I would never be enough. It wasn't a perfect apology, it wasn't closure. But it was real, and it was his first step towards honesty. My father's trial faded from the news, replaced by newer scandals. To rebuild, not the old broken house, but a new foundation of my own. It wasn't easy. Some days the grief still caught me off guard, a song on the radio, a photo from childhood. The sudden longing for a voice I'd never hear again. But with every step, every small act of courage, I felt myself coming back to life. Sometimes I wondered where he was, what he thought about in the silence of his own making. But I never called. I never wrote. There was nothing left to say. I found myself crying, not for what I'd lost, but for the small, flickering hope that maybe, just maybe, something good could grow out of all this wreckage. For years I had let my father's voice drown out my own. I had let shame keep me silent, let fear tell me that love had to be earned or bought. But now, with every story I told, with every truth I shared, I felt the weight lift a little more. Other times I saw Ben as a child, chasing after me in the yard, calling for me to slow down. I always woke up before I could answer him. She never said much about it, but sometimes when we sat together in the pale light of her office, I caught a glimpse of that old pain in her eyes. Colonel Park reached out as well, usually with a quick call or a text. I keep thinking about all the times you tried to warn me, and how I never listened. I told him I was proud of him for trying, for reaching out. I didn't promise we'd be close again, but I promised I'd be here if he wanted to try. I'm sorry. I wish I could take it back. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I hope someday you can. I'm in therapy now, trying to find out who I am, separate from him, from everything. Thank you for not giving up on the truth. Thank you for showing me what real courage looks like. Maybe we can talk when you're ready. He invited me to speak at a training seminar for new officers at the base. Standing in front of those young, eager faces, I felt both vulnerable and strong. I found new rituals, long runs by the river at sunrise, coffee with Carmen, Sunday dinners with friends from the unit. We laughed over bad jokes and cheap pizza, stitched together our own kind of family from the scraps of our old lives. I told them what I wish someone had told me years ago, that courage isn't about never falling. It's about standing back up every time the world knocks you down. That the uniform is only part of who you are. The rest, you have to build for yourself. The nights were hardest, still. There were times I would wake up gasping, heart pounding with old fear, old loss, but those moments became less frequent. The guilt and anger didn't vanish, but they lost their edge. One afternoon, as I was packing up after a veterans meeting, an older man stopped me by the door. I smiled, feeling a swell of hope. As I walked home that evening, I realized just how far I'd come. One night, I found a letter slipped under my door. The handwriting was familiar, shaky, but unmistakable. It was from Ben. Noah, I don't know where to start. I've spent months trying to understand how I missed everything, how I let Dad use me like that. Your brother, Ben. I read it twice, then sat in the silence, letting the words wash over me. I wrote back carefully, honestly. I told him I forgave him, that we both had to learn who we were without Dad's shadow. Days turned into weeks and the world kept moving. Instead, I chose to keep moving forward. And I knew for the first time that I was not alone. Spring melted into summer, and with it my new life began to take shape. The hardest days were still there, lurking in the quiet, but I felt stronger with every one that passed. I learned to trust the rhythm of rebuilding, to believe that scars could be more than reminders, they could be proof of survival. Ben and I exchanged messages now and then, sometimes tentative, sometimes raw. There were stretches when weeks would go by in silence, but then a note or a phone call would arrive. Each one a little easier, a little less heavy. Sometimes we spoke about our childhood, piecing together memories now shaded by everything we'd learned. For a few precious hours, there were no memories of courtrooms or betrayals. Just the ordinary, imperfect joy of people who had survived the storm. Sometimes I imagined her, alone in a grand but empty house, living inside the cage of her own choices. I didn't feel anger anymore, only a gentle, sorrowful pity. Other times we just talked about mundane things, work, a new book, a favorite old movie, careful but honest. He would never walk into another boardroom, never reclaim the power he'd once wielded so easily. It was quieter, more solemn a satisfaction that came not from his downfall, but from the fact that his lies could never touch me again. It was a picture of her and me, standing shoulder to shoulder in front of her office, both of us wearing uniforms, both of us grinning despite everything. I was no longer his investment, no longer his disappointment. Proof you made it. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was running from something, but walking towards something real. Proof you never gave up. But to the ones I had lost, and to the person I was still becoming, the world was wide open now. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but I was ready to meet it with open eyes, steady hands, and a heart no longer burdened by shame. I was just myself, and that was enough. I thought about calling, about telling him something, maybe that I forgave him, maybe just goodbye, but the urge always faded. There were some doors that were better left closed. I still volunteered with the veterans group, but now I also found myself mentoring a few younger officers who were struggling to find their footing. They asked questions about deployments, about leadership, about betrayal, and I answered as openly as I could. I realized that I had finally learned the lesson that had always eluded me. Family is not the people who share your name. Family is the people who show up, who listen, who stand by you even when you have nothing left to offer. I told them that strength was not about never breaking, but about finding the will to get up, to keep showing up, even after you've been broken. Carmen became more than my lawyer, she became one of my closest friends. We shared dinners and sometimes just sat in companionable silence, sipping strong coffee as the city lights flickered outside her small window. But who had found something worth holding on to in the process? We crowded around a battered table in her backyard, smoke hurling from the grill, laughter and stories rising into the evening sky. For the first time in my adult life, I felt the comfort of belonging without having to prove myself. She still had her demons, but together we laughed about the absurdities of life, and sometimes in rare moments she would let her guard down and tell me about the mother who never called the medals she kept in a drawer, the price she'd paid for her own battles. One afternoon, Carmen invited me to a barbecue at her place. A gathering of misfits and fighters, people who had lost their families or had to walk away from them. Colonel Park showed up with his wife, and together we traded old stories, embellishing the truth until everyone was roaring with laughter. Still, every so often I caught myself thinking of my parents. My mother never reached out again, her silence as rigid as her expectations once were. As for my father, I saw his name pop up in the news one last time, a brief note buried in a financial column about a plea deal and a long, quiet sentence. The sense of justice wasn't as sweet as I had once imagined. As the sun set behind Carmen's house that night, I looked around at the faces, some laughing, some lost in thought, all marked by their own private wars. I lifted my glass in a silent toast, not just to the ones at the table. As the evening faded and the laughter gave way to quiet, Carmen pressed an old photograph into my hand. "Hang on to this," she said softly. I slipped it into my pocket, the weight of it grounding me as I walked home through the warm, humming streets. And in that moment, I knew the most important truth of all. I was finally free, not because my father had fallen, but because I had chosen to rise. 6 months after the lost courtroom lights faded, I found myself standing once more in the Hall of Valor, but this time I was not alone. Beside me stood Ben, nervous and awkward, his hands stuffed deep in his pockets. He had flown in from out west, where he was starting over, working for a non-profit helping families rebuild after disaster. It was our first meeting since the trial, and for a long moment we simply stood together in silence, staring at the names etched into the marble. We walked out into the sunlight side by side, neither of us saying goodbye this time. He finally looked at me, his eyes older and gentler. There were still days when the old anger would flicker, when a headline about corporate greed or a glimpse of an expensive suit would make my jaw clench. Sometimes the scars from my family's betrayal would ache in the quiet like a phantom limb. But I learned to let those feelings pass through me without shame. I watched the light shimmer on the water, felt the breeze tug at my jacket, and realized just how far I'd come. I had learned to love myself, not for what I could provide or prove, but simply for surviving, for refusing to let anyone else hold the pen that wrote my life. I was no longer the ghost at someone else's celebration. "You ever think you'd get here?" she asked, a smile in her eyes. But I rebuilt myself from the ruins, stronger and more honest than I'd ever been. That was my real inheritance, not wealth or reputation, but the fierce clarity to never let someone else define my worth again. I wasn't hiding or fighting for a place at anyone's table. My table, my story, was mine alone. His words were uncertain at first, but I saw in them the slow, stubborn hope of someone learning how to live for himself. We weren't close the way brothers are in the movies, but we were honest. Sometimes that was enough. I could honor the pain without letting it define me. "I wish I'd seen you sooner," he said, his voice rough. "I wish I'd known how to reach you," I answered. I found meaning in the small victories, the veteran who opened up for the first time in decades, The young officer who decided to stay in the fight instead of walking away. You're not alone. Share your truth, however messy it is. Someone out there needs to hear it, just like I did. And justice are honored. I invite you to share your story in the comments and subscribe. Let's build something together, one honest word at a time. My own story became a tool, not a burden. The shame was gone. Only the lessons remained. That was all we needed. Not forgiveness, not a grand gesture, just the acknowledgement of a wound and the shared resolve to move forward. My life had settled into a different kind of peace. Carmen stayed in my life, steady and stubborn as ever. We built a kind of chosen family together, her, Colonel Park, a handful of friends from the old unit, and me. Our traditions were small but sacred: barbecue dinners, group texts full of dark humor, and the annual Survivors' Thanksgiving, where no one asked about anyone's parents. It was messy and imperfect and real. I kept volunteering, kept telling my story to anyone who needed to hear it. Ben wrote more often, sending snapshots of his new life: a tiny kitchen crowded with friends, a battered old dog he'd adopted, a garden he was learning to keep alive. One chilly autumn morning, I took a long walk by the river. I thought back on all that had happened: the trial, the betrayals, the long, lonely nights. There was grief, yes, but also gratitude. That night, as I sat with friends at a noisy, cheerful bar, Carmen nudged me with her elbow. "Not once," I said. "But I'm glad I kept walking." We raised our glasses to second chances, to scars, to family, both the kind you're born with and the kind you find along the way. In the end, I didn't win back the family name. I didn't fix everything. If you're listening and you know what it is to lose everything, to start over, to rebuild from ashes, your story matters too. And if you want to be part of a community where every voice is heard, where real stories of resilience,